Welcome everyone to the captive audience. We're getting a little bit late start here. I was delayed driving in traffic, and then we had technical problems caused by me, believe it or not. But we resolved it, and we're here, and we have an important guest with us here tonight, and an important set of messages for you to hear. Our guest tonight with us. Oh, by the way, it's April 1st. And I wish we could just say that all the stuff we're going to tell you is April Fool's jokes, but it's real. It's very real. Maybe the April Fool's joke is going to be on the public that doesn't get to watch our show and doesn't know this is coming. But with us tonight is Chris Gray. He is with the Taxpayers Association, and he's also with the Young Republicans. Tonight, he's in his Taxpayer Association mode, so we got that hat firmly planted. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Hey, thanks for having me again. Always a pleasure to come on.
It's great to have you. And so, front and center, the issue that has kind of caught our attention this week is one that, frankly, you just wonder why you even have an issue like this occurring after 120 years. The state of Oregon, which has had an initiative petition process, which is kind of the great equalizer. It's the great opportunity for the citizens of Oregon to have the final say and actually decide directly that they want to modify our laws and our Constitution, or refer things to the ballot that the legislature does that the people don't agree with. And here we are with Senate Joint Resolution 30, which is proposing a significant amendment to the Oregon Constitution to change the initiative petition process and have a pretty significant effect on it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it, and why will it have a significant effect?
Yeah, so I'm going to have to be quoting a lot from the Oregon Catalyst, which is one of our main ways we inform the public on what's going on in state politics. So under the article of Stop the Petition Busting Bill, Jason Williams, who is the executive director and one of the co-founders of the Taxpayer Association of Oregon, really went into the weeds a little bit and figured out what was going on. Essentially, the petition process requires a bunch of signatures, around to 80,000 signatures to get on the ballot. Normally, you have to get a little bit more, about over 100,000, so that way, in case you have replicas or some sort of fault with your signatures, you have a comfortable margin. However, due to the writing of this bill currently, this process will increase the requirement of signatures of upwards to 20 to 30% more, depending on what it is. So for statutory changes to the law, it will require 25% more signatures, but for constitutional changes, it will increase by 30%. And then there's also this tricky little language into it that if you want things really done correctly, you got to make sure you evenly distribute the signatures across areas. So you just can't have a bunch of, for example, Portlandians gather together and write a change to the bill, submit it just from Portland. No, you have to go from everywhere else. You cannot just have one concentrated area. You have to evenly distribute it. Otherwise, it can be thrown out.
So the net effect is, when people hear that, because they don't always know what all these percentages mean, is that when you need to get signatures in order to qualify for the ballot, I know I've done it a lot. I think you've probably been involved with it too. They look at who voted in the last election for governor. And they require a certain percentage of the people who you have to reach a percentage of the number of people who voted in the last election for governor.
Yes, that's correct.
In the last election for governor in 2022, I believe the percent was it had typically been 6%, right, for statutory changes, or 8%, right?
So I'm actually reading the joint resolution now. It is currently at 8% of those who have voted for governor previously. With this change, as I'm quoting from the bolded highlighted areas, and for those who don't know what that means. When you're changing laws in Oregon, the way you identify what's a change if it's in bold. So, for example, not a additional law proposed by petition signed by a number of qualified voters equal to brackets, the old law, 6%, not less than 8%, for a total number of votes casted for all candidates for governor at the election in which a governor was elected for a 4-year term. So now that 6% is going to go away if this Senate joint resolution passes. It'll now go to a minimum of 8%.
Yeah, which is a significant amount. So I believe in terms of signatures required, 6% right now comes to, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 160,000 signatures for a change of statute and a constitutional amendment. It is, I think, closer to, is it 180? And so when you look at how many signatures you have to gather per day and the resources required to do that, it can easily take like $1 million if you're paying to do this with, instead of just having grassroots people do it. And so that extra 2% actually is a huge difference. And then 10% would put this over 200,000 signatures required for a constitutional amendment. Now, we have a long history of very important ballot initiatives that have been passed over the years that have defined how our Constitution and our laws work. One of them had a tremendous effect on criminal justice in the state. Back in the 80s, judges used to let people out all the time with almost no time served for very serious offenses, violent assault, murder, rape, and people got fed up with it. There was a crime wave. So a state initiative was put forward. Kevin Mannix was the chief petitioner on this, and a once and now current state representative and former gubernatorial candidate. And that they got signatures, they got it on the ballot, and it became what's known as Measure 11, which has protected us from judges letting people out without serving a minimum sentence for these very violent crimes. That was an initiative of the people to do something that the legislature wouldn't do, and judges were doing contrary to the opinion of the people of the state. Measure 5 is another one, right? And that one speaks directly to taxes. Now, do you have some information on that actually that you might be able to share? Because I know that one is very relevant, of course.
In regards to how this can affect protecting the kicker, or such as people petitioning, is that the correct question?
Well, Measure 5, I think, was about property taxes, and it actually set a ceiling. It made it so that you couldn't raise property taxes statewide above a certain level. I think it was a cap. And
I believe that's the case, because I remember a better person to always ask about that is my boss, the executive director, Jason Williams, who actually went on Lars Larson recently, talked about how this Senate joint resolution can put threats into counteracting such bad legislation. Because I believe it was in our history of our organization, coming together and forming Taxpayer Association was in response to defending the kicker, as I believe at the time, Governor, first time around, Kitzhaber was coming after the kicker in some form, from my recollection. Now, I could get my history wrong. I was a little kid when all that stuff happened. But in my aspect, and from what I've listened from my boss on the Lars Larson show, this has a severe effect on us rallying grassroots organizations. But I'm going to also play a little devil's advocate right now, too. There are some arguments from Republican sources as well saying that, well, this is a way to contain some bad issues. One specific aspect is last year we had a really bad initiative called the Measure 118. That was a petition as well. So there's a catch-22. It's a double-bladed sword. But the Taxpayer Association of Oregon believes that this is a sword that we need to keep with us at all times because we can rally, we can do great stuff to defend our constitutional rights in the state of Oregon. And fundamentally is a free speech argument. If you can't organize, you're not able to exercise your First Amendment rights.
So Measure 5 was the property tax ceiling that requires all counties to more frequently assess property values, and then it protected. It put constitutional limits on non-school property taxes, limiting them to 1% or $10 per thousand real market value. If had that not, and for basic school property taxes, it's 1/2 of 1% or $5 per thousand. So if you're owning a home, this is one of the reasons why they can't go above those amounts when they're trying to impose these taxes. Other states don't have a ceiling, and they have enormous property taxes, which are very regressive and affect people who happen to live in a home that appreciated greatly in value, but didn't have an income to match that, and had no control over the appreciation of the value of their home. Yet they can be hit with these property taxes, and the Taxpayers Association was Don McIntyre was one of the people, the chief petitioners on that Measure 5, along with Thomas Dennehy. I just happened to find the Oregon Encyclopedia, the Oregon Historical Society actually has a nice little summary of this, and I'm going to put it there. So this ability of the people to say enough is enough, we don't want government doing this and we don't want government doing that, comes from the ability of people to go out without asking the permission of legislators and politicians to do it themselves directly. Now, it turns out that the Measure 5 is also linked to Measure 50, which Oregon voters passed in 1997, and this was also to offset the impact of lower tax rates for many homeowners. They Measure 50 was designed to let's see, in response. Okay, so there's a whole story here. I can't really read it while we're on the air, but these measures were put into place to make sure that we did not have the state government wasting our tax dollars and raising our taxes constantly to the detriment of the citizens. And there's also Measure 47, which a group called Oregon Taxpayers United, led by Bill Sizemore, a name from the past there, that would roll back property tax assessments by 10%, limit the annual rate of increase for assessments to 3%. And that passed with 52% of the voters in support. And there's a whole story you can read about this, but this defines our current tax situation today. So the Taxpayers Association, one of its founders, Don McIntyre, who obviously worked with the current executive director, Jason Williams, they're very concerned, right, that this is actually going to be an option that's going to be crippled, where the people get to have the final say, and and in particular, the ability to get a percentage of the vote in the terms of signatures in each and every one of the counties is quite a hoop to jump through. And the way Jason put it, I posted a link to the interview he did with Lars Larson. The way he put it is basically impossible.
It is, because think about it this way. I was on the campaign trail last year with working for someone else at the time. And I can tell you this, it's super hard just even trying different areas when you're on a campaign, even in a House district. So when you're going through a different county, there's different rules, different regulations, and people do different things based on where they live. Some people are more open, some people are less. So in the end, you are going to have to coordinate extremely well and effectively at a level I don't think even Democrats are very good at, because this requires more than just going out to urbanly dense areas. No, you have to go to very different cities. So imagine you have to go from Portland and then you have to go to Salem and then Eugene. That's over 100 miles a day. And I can tell you, I've done that drive a few times and it takes a lot out of you just for one day. Imagine doing that for a whole campaign. I know some
Well, and
people who work.
that's the exertion of an individual person. Then when you add it up into like the resources it takes to pay a lot of people to go do that and make up for that, we're talking a
Yeah.
lot of money, right?
Yeah. You can easily go up to $1.5 million easily just in expense to barely qualify. I think that's just going to be the bare minimum for a petition at this point, that you need $1.5 million. More likely, due to how critical a petition could be or the issue itself, it can probably even go up double the amount. It might cost now $3 million, and you probably need a minimum of 150 signatures
So
or
basically, the only
150,000
people,
signatures.
so the only people who will still be able to get initiatives on the ballot will be ultra rich lobbyists and maybe the politicians themselves, because this doesn't affect the ability of state legislators to put initiatives on the ballot if they want to. They can do that, and they can just do it by a simple majority vote of the state legislature. So the politicians can do it, but they want to make it harder for the citizens to do it, which is effectively neutering the ability of the citizens to have a say in their government, which they've enjoyed for 120 years.
Mm-hmm. It is. It can't, from the argument of that point, it would make it very difficult, because in the end, a legislator has the ability to propose any bill that they wish, and they have a certain amount requirement of bills that they can send out. But in the end, if they want something, they can send it to committee. They can go through the legislative process to get it done. Regular non-politicians have to do it the hard way, tell friends, family, and convince hundreds to thousands of people to sign. So it is a very labor intense process, and it can take a long time. So, and I even think ultra rich lobbyists will have a hard time doing this because they have to weigh the costs. Think about, is this really worth my time and money? It's a huge gamble now for anyone.
Well, and it means that when the legislature does something that's totally against what the citizens of the state want, for instance, if they decided they just wanted to effectively end your Second Amendment rights in the state of Oregon, they could pass that. The governor could sign it, and what you would be left with would be this extremely difficult, almost impossible option to take it straight to the people of the state of Oregon and override that decision by the legislature. That's important because we saw that Measure 114, which is a ballot initiative that got on the ballot and it passed by a razor thin margin. It's entirely possible to argue that if people had known more about that initiative, this time you could actually reverse what's being done to our Second Amendment rights by negating Measure 114. But the way the state legislature is currently composed, they were for Measure 114 in the state legislature before it passed by that narrow margin. The state legislature is not as evenly divided as the vote on Measure 114 was statewide. The state legislature is in a supermajority of Democrats who love the idea of essentially neutering your Second Amendment rights, your ability to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. And this is something that, well, if the legislature goes too far, or in the case of Measure 11, if the judges go too far and the legislature doesn't do anything about it, the people can take the matters into their own hands at the ballot box. But now this Senate Joint Resolution 30 would essentially make that almost impossible. And the great history that we have of stopping taxes, which if the legislature decided to double our taxes and we wanted to take strong measures to make sure that couldn't be done, we couldn't do it.
Yeah. I'm going to quote Jason Williams again. The petition method is one of the greatest weapons we have in a one party system. Unfortunately, that is Oregon right now. We are in a one party state. The House and Senate are in supermajority. While the House can potentially be taken back due to it just flipping by one seat last year to get out of the super minority, it's still a very uphill battle for a actually non one party system. The governor is controlled, and the Supreme Court is pretty liberal by just looking at the judgments they have ruled thus far. In the end, the petition method is one of the greatest tools that you can use to break the cycle of a one party state. So,
Yep. And ensure limited government when you have a one party state that's in favor of unlimited government and unlimited taxes. So this committee hearing is going to be tomorrow, right?
that's correct. It will be held at 1 p.m. in hearing room C, I believe. And we have all the details provided on Oregon Catalyst and Oregon Watchdog. All you need to do is just follow those links, look for those stories about Senate Joint Resolution 30, and we have everything ready for you. And if you want to submit testimony, if you can't make it in person, submit testimony. That's one of the best ways to alert representatives and senators that you're not in favor of it. Currently, from what I've seen thus far, there's only been one organization that has written support, while there's been over 70 opposition statements provided, which includes the Taxpayer Association of Oregon.
And we need as many regular folks as possible, because all of these, nonprofit or NGO advocacy groups, they're always there in the Capitol. They're always pushing for these types of policies. But this is an opportunity for regular folks like all of you to go and submit your testimony directly, so that the politicians here, that we don't really want them to have this much power. We don't want them to take away the citizens' right to exercise the initiative petition process. Now, that doesn't mean we like every initiative petition that comes through, but I'll give you one example of where somebody might say, well, then what about Measure 110? That was a bad one, right? It was. And we found out it was a bad one. But one thing we learned is that at the time, there was a conscious decision not to bother fighting it. Had we fought it, we know from pollster Mike Riley, which we've had on the captive audience before, it would have been defeated soundly, because they can test what people knew, and they did it right at the time of the election, just before it. And they said if they were told the information about what the measure was, they would have rejected it. Mm-hmm. So, I think actually these battles are ones that we have to have over public policy, and they do cost resources, but there isn't a shortcut to this. And by the way, a version of Measure 110 is something that the Democrats are more than happy to pass in the state legislature, and they passed enabling legislation for it. So we actually have to be ready to fight these battles and not hand over everything to politicians who spend all their time in Salem with lobbyists, and not you and I. You and I need to speak up, and that's what we need to do. And I have posted a link directly to the Senate Joint Resolution. You can actually go there, and you can go and click on, in fact, I'll put a link to the hearing that's taking place tomorrow, and you can see what testimony has been submitted for tomorrow's hearing, and you'll see it's oppose. There's a whole bunch of opposition statements, and then just a few of the supportive statements. And I think this is important, because you'll quickly get an idea that this is something that if we speak up, we can probably kill a bad idea.
Absolutely. And as you just said there, the overwhelming majority of the statements provided are in opposition. And it's not just from the right either. It's also from the left as well. As I see some progressive organizations, some core Democrats, this is a bipartisan situation.
That's right. Oregon, the Oregon League of Conservation Voters has opposed it. There's the League of Women Voters. And this is in addition to many conservatives and many names I recognize on this list. There's a group called Citizens' Right to Vote on Issues. Another group called Voters' Rights. There's a lot that's going to be learned and heard about this. I do want to point everybody, if you would, to the testimony that has been submitted that we've been referring to from Jason Williams, the executive director. And I just posted a link to that. You can download that and go read it, and then decide if you kind of get a sense of what he's saying, you can also go and submit your testimony. And by the way, you can do it online, or you can register. There's links right next to the hearing that say register to testify and show up in person, get there early, or submit testimony online. Both of those are possible and very important. And we did post the link to the audio from Lars Larson's show yesterday when he interviewed Jason Williams. You can listen to it. It's only 8 minutes long. It goes by very fast, and it is very informative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great listen. I recommend that you check it out if you're just slightly interested on the issue. So that way you can hear the executive director talk on the issue, who's extremely knowledgeable about this. And he is excellent conversation with Lars. So I recommend you check it out.
What other tax issues do we have because we've been getting a few questions here in the feed too. I know that we've talked, when you were on previously, we talked about the House Joint Resolution 6, I think, which is the property tax, statewide property tax that they're discussing. And then there's also the 4% tire tax. What's the status of those two taxes?
So we'll start off with some good news for actually what seems like a while. From basically what I can tell, there's no work schedule set, or there's no work session scheduled at this point. And by my estimations, and from what I've been hearing from other people, the tire tax is dead for currently. However, due to the complicated way our legislature works, sometimes they can pull something out that is seemingly dead, but not really dead.
Zombies.
So I believe it's dead, but you don't know. It's always a little wave of the fingers, a little bit of magic, and boom, it's back online. But from my estimation and from the amount of testimony that was provided in opposition to the tire tax, which was over, I believe, 1,800 statements submitted in opposition, with only a couple hundred in support, this bill is extremely unpopular, and it's kind of almost politically suicidal for any of the legislators to pursue it forward. So effectively, from my point of view, it's dead. So the tire tax is dead. I can't even remember the bill off the top of my head right now.
I'll look it up. I think I have it somewhere handy, but that's good news. It was a 4% tax on a very expensive purchase that people have to make in order to keep their cars running.
Yes, I actually believe I have it right in front of me. I have it in a different tab. It's HB 3362.
There we go. Yep. And there was a hearing on the 4th of March. You can go and check that out if you want to see what was said about it. But the fact that it doesn't have a work session yet pretty much means that it's going to die, most likely.
And it was referred to Ways and Means.
Yeah.
Which I do not believe it has the ability to pull it off currently. However, I could be a little shaky on that information.
I think Ways and Means does. I think there's rules, and Ways and Means are two committees that they can bring things back from the dead. They can stuff it into another bill. But having said that, we know that the Democrats, the leadership, have a lot of tools they can do. What's important is that people spoke up on this bill, right? And overwhelmingly said, no way.
Yes. And like I said, it was vastly overwhelmingly in opposition. is
Yeah.
political suicide for the chief sponsors to recommend pulling that back out and to make it a live bill once again.
And I just posted that link with the bill number in case somebody wants to go track that down. So the other one that we were just talking about is House Joint Resolution 6, and that's
Yes.
the statewide property tax. And what's the latest on that?
Well, this one, it was sent to
Rules.
rules, which means it can come back. However, it hasn't been touched since January. The measure history has it put it on, it was referred to rules on the 17th, which it's been a few months now at this point where it hasn't even had a public hearing. So likely it's not going anywhere, but because it is in rules, it can come back. So this one you
Yeah.
just have to keep your eye on and hope they just let it die.
Yeah, one thing you have to know about the Rules Committee is that what they can do is they essentially can use the Rules Committee to bypass the normal rules. That's essentially how it works. And the people that are in that committee tend to be the people it's populated with the leadership from both sides of the aisle in the state house, which means that the leadership can just have a conversation with itself and decide they want something to move. So we'll keep an eye on that. You
Yes.
can all keep an eye on that. It's okay at any time to go send a message to the members of the committee, to your own legislators, by the way, Senate and House, and let them know that you think it's a stinking bad idea.
Yes.
That's always a good move.
And the chair of the committee is Speaker of the House, Ben Bowman. So,
Yep.
and then vice chair is Christine Drazen. So it does have both sides leaders on this. So
Yep.
feel free to check it out. Check the committee of rules. There's many leaders on both sides on it. And then you can also, at any point in time, if you have a bill that you want to track on the Oregon State Legislature, you can e-subscribe. So if you click on the e-subscribe in the top right-hand corner near the RSS, you can get email notifications on any changes of the bill. That's what I do with some of the big ones, such as HJR 6. So
Yep.
if you want to keep a track on anything, this is the number way to do so.
And we're watching that too, so we'll make sure we give you a heads up. Any other bills that we want to give people some notification on? You guys cover a lot of stuff with the Oregon Catalyst, so
Yes.
you never know what might be out there.
Yeah, there is one more bill. So I want to talk quickly about a bill that is going to be very costly but we don't know how costly it's going to be. It's SB 611, which will establish the Food for All Oregonians program.
Yeah.
So for those who are not aware, imagine having SNAP benefits, but at the state level.
Food
and
stamp.
It's for everyone. It doesn't
No, I
matter.
mean
if you're here.
it's called food. The people might not know what SNAP means, but it's food
Yeah.
stamp.
Yeah, it's food snaps. It's the Supplement Nutrition Act program by the federal government. So whenever you are in not the greatest situations and you are needing a little bit of a rebate basically on some food, you can apply for these federal programs and get some support if you need it. But now imagine this big federal program for the state of Oregon for anyone who's under the age of 26 and above the age of, I believe, 65. This program can potentially be extremely costly because let's just face facts. A lot of Oregon population is growing older. We have a big public funding program, PERS, public employee funding for our pensions. This is just another huge way that we could really grow our deficit. And what's happened thus far with this program, and I forgot to mention, when they say food for all, it doesn't matter your legal status too. This is also for non-citizens of the United States. And it specifically says, regardless of your immigration status.
And that's actually the real point of the bill, by the way, because there already is a federally funded food stamp program for low-income people. And that's where the reason why they're creating this is because they can't use federal funds for the to give food stamps to illegal immigrants because they don't qualify.
That is the number one. That is the number one reason. If you actually watch the public hearing it had, which it had a public hearing, I believe, a couple of days ago, or not a couple of days ago, last week. I believe it happened on Tuesday of last week. And so that would be the 25th, 24th, I want to say. This program was brought to committee hearing, and the vast majority of the testifiers were actually from the food bank and for those who were aligned with the program.
Yeah.
So it has been heard. I believe there's been a lot of support for it by the Oregon Food Bank. The Taxpayer Association of Oregon came out in opposition of this statement, or of SB 611. And I'm not kept update with it this week due to keeping my eye on.
Well, I
SJF30.
just looked it up. There's a work session on next week, next Tuesday. It is the 8th of April. And what a work session is since, as you mentioned, Chris, they did a public hearing on the 25th. That's where the public gets to have input to come testify against it, submit testimony. The 8th is where they hold a public meeting of the committee and they work on the bill. In other words, this is where they most likely will cast votes to advance the bill or deal with any amendments that have come up. And that's going to be next week, 8 a.m. in hearing room D, the Senate Committee on Human Services. But as you mentioned, the people in favor of this are the groups that are sort of feeding at the trough, pun intended, of government funding for administering these programs. They're all in favor of it because they love it. And the food bank has been clearly called out as a political action group, one that Tina Kotek herself actually has a close historical association with. They've come out and endorsed candidates for office. They've endorsed ballot initiatives that had nothing to do with food, or such as the measure 114. For instance, they actually are an activist organization that when this passes, you will be paying them to give money to illegal immigrants who are probably fleeing other states where they can't get this and coming to Oregon. So if you like having an unlimited number of illegal immigrants flowing into the state of Oregon where we can all pay for their every meal, then this bill is a brilliant idea.
Yeah, and it actually will create a higher burden upon Oregonians because it will incentivize more illegal immigration, more people applying for benefits, and more people competing for housing, food, everything. When you bring in more competition by people competing for the same resources, and these people are not being paid minimum wage, let's call a spade. They're being used because they're cheap labor. So you're incentivizing low wages, depreciation labor wages, and honestly, a lot of the old school left, such as Bernie Sanders, would even be greatly opposed to this back in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
In fact, there's many testimonies that Bernie Sanders and many of these more radical Democrats have said in the past.
Yeah, it's back when Democrats were in favor of helping working class and lower income Americans with these programs and not everybody else in the world. They were actually opposed to things like this. But look, this is something that could be a major mistake, I think, by the Democrats, and they're moving forward with it. But we need to let everybody know. Like, we don't want any Republicans getting sucked in to think this is a good idea. That's not how this is supposed to work. There are private organizations, by the way, who do make sure that they supply food and clothing and shelter to illegal immigrants. So this isn't about, no one's allowed to help them. but should the government and taxpayers be forced to do this? And that's what this bill is about.
Yeah. And also, getting back to an earlier point about the Oregon Food Bank being a political arm, it is a full political arm because during the public hearing, the president of the Oregon Food Bank testified in favor of this. So you can't even make the argument this is a nonpartisan organization anymore. They are 100% partisan.
Yep. Well, I just saw, by the way, you had one other tax that we could just mention before we wrap up here today. There's a drink tax.
Oh, yes.
It's House
an
Bill
8% alcohol
3940. What do
tax.
we need to know about that one? That one had a hearing today at 8 a.m.
Yeah, I unfortunately did not catch the public hearing on this, but basically there are two alcohol tax. There's now a beverage tax, which is a completely different bill, but they're just going full consumption tax on us in a high regard. So this will tax all alcoholic drinks within Oregon. And I'm going to play my heart. I worked in the wine industry. I live in wine country. And I can tell you this, the margins are not great for most wineries. And now
Yeah.
you're applying a additional tax on them, which they already have a extremely high operation cost. You're going to kill one of the greatest prestigious things Oregon has that's known internationally. Our wines are internationally recognized as extremely high quality that competes with Burgundy, France.
Yeah.
So why punish for no good reason the hardworking men and women of Oregon by potentially making them lose their jobs? So in the end, this is just a consumption tax that's going to result in not that much revenue. It would disincentivize growth for the wine industry and leave many people without jobs.
Yeah, and I think it's safe to say, and this one, by the way, taxes all beverage containers. This specific one, so of course they're aimed at beer and wine, but it would do soda, juice, cider, even just plain water, by the estimate of the Taxpayer Association, right? Which is just crazy. Like, this is where they have decided that they just will do anything to get more money, and
And it's
it
also
does damage.
Yeah, and they're also trying to justify this as a way to pay for fire mitigation and preventing wildfires. But in the end, the revenue justified from it would not cover the necessary requirements. And in the end, it's unjust from many organizations, including the Taxpayer Association, unjustly say this is not the way to do it. You are just harming businesses and result less funding for all these critical programs.
That's right. And actually, why the heck don't they just use the general fund to prevent wildfires, which they're not really doing, by the way.
No, they've
They're
been
not
struggling with
preventing
this
them because we
problem.
see them every year.
We're struggling with this problem because in the end, we're not tackling the problem of wildfires.
Yeah.
I'm going to quote Senator David Brock Smith, who talked about this during the wildfire maps. 80 to 90% of all wildfires, roughly, are caused on federal land. It's the
Mhm.
government that's not managing their forest. Now, thankfully, we're seeing a change in this thanks to a new change to the EPA and also Trump wanting to free up forests for lumber harvesting, which would actually be one of the greatest moves Trump could do for all Oregonians, revitalizing the lumber industry.
Yeah, because they would harvest out the dangerous dead wood and underbrush that leads to the very intense fires that lead to the massive wildfires every year. And the Democrats, they always take a tax and they take whatever the cause du jour is. I remember 2 years ago it was homelessness. 3 years ago it was public safety. And of course they always say that they're going to do stuff for climate justice. And now, of course, this is to fight wildfires. They don't really do anything about these problems, but they'll use them as an excuse to pass a tax or a fee to suck more money out. And you know why they're doing it? Because they're not getting as much money from the federal level now, and they want to keep all the woke green garbage programs that they got going. They don't want to make the tough decisions about what government should actually be doing, which I think the basics of a government, if they aren't providing for public safety if they're not making sure that the economy stays healthy, which often means that they should get out of the way and not tax it so much. And of course, if in the case of the state government, if they're failing at to educate kids, then they shouldn't be spending money on everything else. I think you could throw in highways and transportation into that, but go out and drive through a few potholes and you'll question that one too. So we're right at this is why taxes are inextricably connected to what Democrats want to spend money on, which is often not the thing they say they need the taxes for. It's just the cause du jour that they want to fool people into thinking this is a good tax, so they can just, because every taxes ultimately the poor. That's every tax ultimately lands on the poor because everybody else can avoid them, or everybody else can afford them to some extent, but the poor can't. So there's
yeah, a good accounting is expensive. That's just a fact. A really good accountant will find a way to get a lot of deductions out of it. And
That's
in
right.
the end, if you're collecting so much revenue, but there's no changes and you're funding all these programs, well, then there's something fundamentally wrong at the administrative level. So I think it just comes back around. If we have to pay so much for no change, then there needs to be a change at the administrative level and
Yep.
really look in what's going on. Why are we paying so much? Why is there no changes? And where are these funds going to? There needs to be probably full audits.
Would be great if there was some Doge action here in the state, but we got to work our way towards it. Let's make sure that that the beast can't feed itself more off of us. And let's make sure that we keep our initiative process so that maybe when push comes to shove, the citizens can step in when the politicians fail, and we can make sure that we rein it in like we did.
Exactly.
The Taxpayer Association did years ago, all the way back to Measure 5 and Don McIntyre and eventually the Taxpayers Association. So, hey, Chris, thanks for joining me here tonight. Really appreciate it. By the way, is there anything that you just want to tell people about with the Young Republicans? Does anyone need to? How can they get involved? Because I know that that's something that we every once in a while we like to mention, just how people can follow that up.
Absolutely. So the Young Republicans just went through a leadership change, and we are beginning new programs within the Young Republicans as of right now. Everything's in the work, and we have a ton of work ahead of us. And we need anyone between the ages of 18 and 40 to come join us. So if you want to lead new projects, be part of something bigger, network with like-minded people, then go to yro.gop. That is our main website, and you can follow us on the big three on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Just look for Young Republicans of Oregon.
I just posted the web page, and I just went to the About page for leadership, and there's a guy named Tanner Elliott who's the state chair, and then there's this guy who's the vice chair that I recognize. So you are now the new vice chair of the Young Republicans of Oregon, eh?
That is correct. I don't like to brag about stuff. So.
Oh no, you got to let people know. They want to know who the leaders are so they can follow in their footsteps and help them. So thank you for stepping up and doing that. And thank you again for being on here tonight on behalf of the Taxpayers Association. Hey, everybody, I'm going to be there tomorrow. I hope I see you if you can make it in person to testify. And if you know somebody who lives close, like in Salem, and you think they might want to come and put in some testimony, it's 1:00 tomorrow, and they should register ahead of time online to do that, or just go online and submit the testimony if you can't come.
Exactly. That's all you really need to do. Anything helps.
And the Taxpayer Association, you can follow the Taxpayer Association at OregonWatchdog.com and OregonCatalyst.com. And again, thanks again for joining us here today, Chris. And we look forward to having you on again.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks everyone for watching the show. Please share it with everyone you can. Sorry for the technical problems, but we gave you a full program tonight anyway. Share it with everyone you can, and let people know that if you get your opinion in there, we can actually kill some bad bills. Even Democrats can be shamed into killing bad bills. It can be done. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Captive Audience tomorrow night. It should be Sunday and Dawn. or at least Don. I think Sonny's out of town. So